look, let's be honest, Derek Jacobi only playing the Master for one episode of New Doctor Who was always a waste. But Big Finish is looking to rectify it. I gotta figure out how to replace the battery in this thing. Anyways, so I have gone in a slightly different direction with Big Finish this time. I've moved away from some of the older stuff, the earlier stuff, and looked at something fairly recent. The War Master box set. I guess it's counting as Series 1 now because they're going to do at least 3 more of these things. No promises that I'm doing those right off, because the first thing to point out about the box sets, as opposed to most of the stuff that I've talked about previously when I've talked about Big Finish, which were single individual stories, is that it is way more expensive. So I can thank my Patreon supporters not only for selecting this particular option, but also if I didn't have the backing of my Patreon supporters, I'm not sure I could have justified the expense. At least not before knowing how good it was, because yeah, this is pretty dang good. So I'm trying to think of the best way to even cover this, because as a box set, there are 4 stories in it, but there's also an arc and a bit of a continuous thing going across the 4 stories, but they do still all work as fairly individual pieces. Maybe not the last one, because the last one is very much a culmination of what came before, but certainly the previous 3 work as pretty, complete story experiences in and of themselves, all centered around, in some way, Derek Jacobi's version of the Master, now officially dubbed the War Master. So this is the Master during the period in which the Time Lords have revived him, and he is in some way involved in the Time War. At this point, whether he is acting completely on his own or whether he is in some way supposed to be working on behalf of the Time Lords is not made entirely clear. One suspects that the Master really can't help but self-serve no matter what the context is going on around him for the most part. But I'm going to avoid spoilers as much as is possible, because if you can afford this, I do recommend it. And I know, Big Finish is, I can't count on everyone having, heard these the way that I can with episodes of the show. So, we start out with a story called Under the Viscoid, which is the most straightforward of these. It has the Master basically trying to retrieve his own crashed TARDIS and masquerading as the Doctor in the process, hoping that the Doctor's reputation will help him get in basically a better position with the folks that he needs to manipulate in order to get what he wants, at the same time that he is trying to duck out on the Daleks, whom he cut a deal with that he has no intention of honoring, which is just as well, because they weren't going to honor their end of things anyways. They're Daleks. But watching that play out and hearing Derek Jacobi, he does the Master. I mean, his Master is the most expertly manipulative version of the Master that I think I've seen at all. I'd like probably since Delgado, definitely. And you just the presentation that he puts forward to convince people that they should trust him is quite impressive, and especially when it turns, because it has a number of points when it turns. The next one that follows up on this one is called The Good Master, which is not entirely what it sounds like, because you think, oh god, they turned him into a good guy. And that's one of the things about this set overall, which is that it's always risky doing something focused on a villain where the villain's actually your protagonist. Because I've listened to, Big Finish villain centric stuff before, but even something like Davros is about how he became what we knew him to be. So you could still work with that. But to have a character who is a villain in the time frame that we've seen him, and you're having him at the point where he needs to still be as bad as we've ever seen him, but have him be your main character. That's really tricky to make work, and they find some really interesting ways to do it and get around the usual problems with that, because the standard problems with something like that are, in order to have you not going, why would I ever root for this guy, he's the worst thing ever. Oftentimes these sorts of stories end up softening the villain in such a way that they're become more of an anti-hero than a villain. And while the Doctor is certainly the protagonist, the Master is certainly the protagonist of the story overall, it never feels like they cheapened or softened who he is. In fact, at various points across these stories, we get notable reminders of precisely who he is and how he tends to be. At the same time, there are some really interesting relationships that play. The big one being the one that gets established in this second story, The Good Master, which is with a guy by the name of Cole. Now, Cole is, I believe, he's a medical engineer. I forget his exact title, but he was a guy who almost died, and the Doctor managed to save, and he kind of becomes the Master's de facto companion over the remainder of the stories. Now, that dynamic is a little bit different than the Doctor and the companion, which again is really interesting, that they set up the dynamic that we're used to seeing with the Doctor, but allow it to be the different beast that it would have to be if it's going to be the Master instead of the Doctor. But coming back to The Good Master, it's an interesting one because it kind of poses the question, because again, he's hiding and he's masquerading as something that he isn't, which is, in this case, he's not pretending to be the Doctor, but he's pretending to be a doctor and a surgeon, and he's helping people. And it brings in interesting questions about the validity of good actions taken by immoral people for bad reasons, because even though he's doing it to maintain his cover, the Master is saving people's lives repeatedly. And it brings up, it doesn't dive too deeply into them, but I do like that it kind of touches on that question. And then the following story, The Skyman, kind of looks at the opposite end of that. What happens when the best possible intentions result in less than ideal outcomes. So the Skyman is, I would say, is the strongest of the set, and it is really heavy. It's like Black Mirror heavy. It feels like Doctor Who meets Black Mirror. And the basic premise, I'll tell you the starting premise on this. So at this point, Cole is traveling with the Master, and the Master, he's explained to Cole, the war is so much bigger than you think it is. Look at all these planets; these are all going to be destroyed. And Cole says, "Well, you have to do something." And Master says, "I absolutely do not have to do anything, and there's no point in trying." And Cole says, "Well, let me try. Let me try and help. Let me try and save something." And the Master, it's a wonderful moment. He just shows them a map of all these planets that he knows are going to be destroyed, because as a Time Lord, he understands, the function of time and the things that are going to happen, or possibly even have already happened, depending on how you look at time. And he goes, "Okay, all these planets are doomed. Pick one and try and save it." And just that statement, pick one, sends Cole into this, wait, how am I supposed to even pick something? And you get almost immediately what the Master's going to kind of put him through in terms of challenging his convictions of going in to save the day. And it's the real brilliance of the Skyman is the pacing of it. It is gloriously paced and perfectly built up as Cole attempts to help this sort of very, I was going to say, unsophisticated, but they've kind of chosen to not advance technologically because that keeps them off the radar of the people involved in the Time War. But they have, very basic lives, but they are dying. They are in danger, and Cole tries to help. And we see the relationships he builds, the care that he has. We see what is driving every step of this process, and we just get to see where it goes. And where it goes is, yeah. You know what it reminded me of a little bit? It's like the world's most depressing version of the Star Trek Next Generation episode Inner Light. That was the one where Captain Picard gets knocked into a coma and has this whole simulated memory of living on this planet that is ultimately doomed. And, living among these people and having a family and all this stuff, but ultimately, all these people are just dead, and he's just sort of this is their way of imparting the memory of their civilization into somebody. And when I say it's similar, I mean like the general mood, the whole sort of person who has higher end knowledge, stuck in the civilization, trying to help, trying to move things forward for them. But as opposed to, the slightly sad, slightly melancholy, but ultimately sort of touching way that Inner Light turned out, the Skyman is not that. So, yeah. Really good. Really good. Really affecting. Really unsettling. That one. And then we end on the Heavenly Paradigm, which, like I said, is very much the culmination of all of the stuff that's come before. So the Heavenly Paradigm has the Doctor and Cole basically trying to retrieve a Time Lord device that I keep saying the Doctor. The Master and Cole trying to retrieve no version of the Doctor makes an appearance in this. So anytime I accidentally slip up and say the Doctor, I mean the Master. So the Master and Cole are trying to retrieve a Time Lord device that the Master believes he can put to a use that will end the entire war. And they are trying to retrieve it from this suburban home in 1970s England. Which, being Time Lord technology, what's inside the house is not what you would expect. But there's some cool little sort of twisty bendingness going on, and there's some really great interactions between the Master and the person that they find inside that house. And it ends, I think, kind of how this sort of series had to end in terms of where characters end up, how things wrap up, and the overall vibe of the thing. I am going to get into spoilers in just a minute, but the last thing I'll mention, I really love the theme song that they created for the War Master. It is this dirge war drum, inverted version of the Doctor Who theme, but it's really cool, and everybody in this is great. I mean, Derek Jacobi is great, and he plays the different sides and facets of the Master in terms of who he pretends to be and who he really is. And Cole is great. He's a terrific character. There's a wonderful earnestness to him. And his performance chemistry with Jacobi is terrific. And all of the other every story had highlight guest characters, so it's really well done. The production values are great. I burned through this pretty much as a binge because I could not stop listening to it. It's really good, and I'm gonna have to talk a little bit more about spoilers in 3, 2, 1. So the casualness with which the Master kills Cole is jarring in the best way, and you should see it coming. And I did suspect that the Master was going to ultimately kill Cole. I didn't expect such callousness in it, though. Because I kind of expected, him to go, oh, I am going to miss you, but this is something I have to do. No, none of that. He just does it. Oh, there you go, my boy. And he's gone. And that is just the perfect reminder of who the Master is and how he operates and how you should have seen it coming, because at the end of that first story, Into the Viscoid, you've got this really, like, I say brutal and you don't even see it, but like the audio, the screams are wow. When the Master kills this woman who had been helping him, and she even gets on the TARDIS, and you think, oh, maybe she's going to travel with him now, and he just kills her, not for any particularly practical reason, but because he doesn't want to bring her along where he's going next. He makes a claim about, oh, well, I can't, humans are forbidden there, but like, he just didn't want to. This guy's not a rule follower, and he kills her because that's easier. And Derek Jacobi is so good at portraying this softer personality that the Master will fake, that when you have it for a long enough time, when you're with it long enough, especially like with his relationship with Cole and his interactions with Cole, you can't help but buy into it a little bit. And so then when he turns, which he does because he has to, because he's the Master, because he is incapable of doing something that doesn't also benefit him. I mean, if whatever's going to give him the better result. And for a time, what was going to give him the better result was having Cole with him. And then eventually what's going to give him the better result is if Cole is dead. And now Cole's dead. That's it. That's just how it works with this guy. And it is a coldness that he hides so well when he is not wishing to tip his hand. And it's also really interesting. It helps bring back the menace and the fear of the Master, because part of the problem with the Master as a character is pretty much, aside from stuff like this, all we've ever seen him do is appear in Doctor Who, and whenever he appears in Doctor Who, he is foiled by the Doctor. And it becomes the same problem that every single long-term recurring villain in every long-form narrative medium has, which is they lose every time. Eventually, that's just not intimidating anymore. But to see what happens and to see what the Master is capable of when the Doctor isn't there to stop him. Not that every plan that the Master has goes off completely without a hitch or exactly as he intended. But first of all, the guy's got backup plans. He knows what he's doing. But then even beyond that, he will still do massive damage even if, what the outcome that he gets isn't exactly what he wanted. Just to see him basically run rampant in the absence of the Doctor is kind of terrifying. And this is just so masterfully done. And coming back to the Skyman, the progression of that from I'm here and I want to help. I really care about you and your father and this community. Here, try this. Okay, I'll tweak it and do this. No, you have to let me do this. No, please, why are you doing this to me? No, I'm doing this to help you. Let me do this. And the lengths that he goes to before he realizes what a horrible mistake he has made. And you can see it coming. I mean, you can see that what he's doing is not only not going to save these people, it's probably going to make things worse. And that happens to the nth degree. And It's just so well executed. The performances of everybody in that story. And like I said, the pacing, the progression. It spends just enough time at each step along this path, along this road to hell paved with good intentions. Every step on that road is perfectly paced. It is there just long enough to get you the exact feeling about these characters, about the situation that it needs to, and then it moves forward. Because if it had lingered too long on any one of these moments, then it would have been a slog. And if it had done them any shorter than it was, then it wouldn't have had the same emotional resonance. It is like, I don't know if people have ambitions to do audio dramas. Anyone who has an ambition to write or try and produce audio dramas needs to listen specifically to The Skyman for a masterclass on pacing. It's amazing. And it's depressing. Man, oh man. I think I'll wrap up there. There aren't too many specific spoilers that I feel the need to go into on the other two. Like, I could spend a lot more time going into details and, talking about some of the more outlandish concepts that I always love when they turn up in Big Finish. Some of the more surreal things like the heart of the planet and this whole, the whole thing with the house where that's in the heavenly paradigm, and the way it kind of shifts and isn't logical. And just these kinds of things being in Big Finish that, you don't see in the show necessarily, because they are hard and abstract and really difficult to visualize in a way that sells it. Whereas you do it in audio, your brain does it for you, and they don't have to worry about how much money it will cost them to try and visualize some of these ideas. This is really great. I mean, it's really terrific. And eventually, at some point, I'd like to hear all the other ones that are going to come out. I can't really. I don't think I'm going to buy them like as soon as they're out. I've got other stuff to try as far as the Big Finish stuff goes. I've got quite a bit of stuff I've already bought that I just need to listen to. But this was a kind of a singular listening experience, because it walks that line of having a quote-unquote protagonist who is also the villain, and it doesn't soften him. It keeps him as what he needs to be, and it just works. So, The War Master, Only the Good. Have you heard it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's a whole bunch of buttons and links and things that you can push, including a link to the Patreon, which I mentioned already. So check them out if you feel like it. If you don't worry about it, because you are the council and I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.